if you clicked on this video, you're probably someone sitting on multiple medical school acceptances. So I want to wish you a huge congrats on that accomplishment. I also want to say I understand that choosing a medical school can be a super daunting decision. For me, I'm in an MD PhD program, so when I was picking a medical school, it's essentially cementing the next 7 to 8 years of my life, and that was kind of what was weighing on me and why I was stressed about the decision. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about different factors that people have brought up when it comes to choosing a medical school, and then my own personal opinions and insight on whether or not I think those factors are actually important. Of course, at the end of the day, what medical school you go to is your personal decision, and it is a personal one, so I would recommend you consult with your close friends and family as well. But this video is really just meant to provide a little bit of insight just in case you need something from an older student who has been in your shoes before. I do also want to stress that this is my own personal experience and my own personal insights, and not at all meant to be like the one correct thing to do. And so yeah, with all of that out of the way, let's get started. So I'm going to start with one thing that I thought was important but was actually not, and this is going to be a little bit controversial, so hear me out, but it's going to be location. When I was trying to decide on which medical school to go to, I talked to a bunch of different students at the choices that I had, and one of them told me, Cindy, remember you're here for 6 to 8 years, and that you are not making a decision for location for 24-year-old you're making a decision on the location for 30-year-old you. And that stressed me out because let me tell you guys, if I followed that advice, I would not be in a medical school in New York City. I know for a lot of people living in New York is an absolute dream, but for me, being in New York City is a major drawback. I don't have anything against the city per se. I just have always envisioned my 20s and my late 20s specifically to be spent in a more like suburban town. I went to undergrad in Ithaca, New York at Cornell, so I really liked the college town vibes. I also like small town vibes, and I have just always envisioned my med school years being spent in more like a college town suburban setting rather than New York City, which is like the farthest that you can get from that. Secondly, people also typically stress that you go to school near your family, and New York City is so far away from my family. So taking all of these things into account, if I actually listened to that advice and I actually believe that location was super important, I would not be here right now. And I think for me personally, that would have been a mistake. And I would also kind of say that at this point in my life, I wouldn't even mind staying here for residency. And like looking back now, like as I'm saying this, I feel like a younger version of me would be so surprised because I was so against the idea of living in New York City. All that is to say, I think people are adaptable and they can make a location work for them, especially if you're looking at, 4-year MD programs. And hey, even for me, I'm in a 7 to 8 year MD PhD program and I'm thriving in New York City. Also, you're not stuck here forever. You can definitely try to match somewhere else for residency. And so for all of these reasons, I just don't think location is a particular deal breaker. And of course, everyone's life circumstances is different. So I totally understand if this is a completely hot take and people don't agree with me, but this is my current experience so far, and I really have adapted to living here. So going on to the second thing that I thought was important, but turns out to actually not be important, is the idea of a social scene / cohort or class vibes at a school. I feel like I see this talked about a lot on social media. People are like, oh, like suss out the vibes of the students at the school. Like, what are their vibes? Like, do you vibe with them? I don't really have a problem with the fact that the word vibes is kind of like imprecise. Like, my problem with it is that what you see on revisit day of how the students interact with each other is what you perceive of the school's social scene or the cohort vibes, and it's not representative of the whole school. And you also don't know if that particular vibe is going to be captured for your class because your class has completely different people. So when I was applying to medical school, I actually really wanted to go to a school where it looked like the student body is a tight-knit community. And again, I will say that if I had thought about this and weighted much higher, I would not be at the school I am right now because I really actually don't think my school is that tight-knit in terms of the student body. And this is my own opinion. It's not a dig at anyone at the school. It's just like comparatively, this school was not the warmest school that I had revisit at. And I also remember asking specifically during MD PhD revisit if the classes have vertical integration, which was something that was like super important to me at the time for whatever reason. It's not important to me anymore. What I mean by that is, do the upperclassmen like talk to the underclassmen? And someone just pretty much answered very honestly no. And then every time I asked this question at other schools, I feel like the answer was yes. And so I thought, okay, other schools have a more tight-knit, like close culture. But I actually think now, looking back, people were just telling me that. Do I actually think people were like super tight-knit at other schools? Probably not. And so I'm really glad I did not base my decision off of like the perceived closeness of the cohort or the school in general. So I will just say this, don't use this like perceived closeness to make your decision, because even if you think that the people are close, people tend to self-select for revisit events. People tend to want to tell applicants what they want to hear for these revisit events. People who volunteer for revisit events also typically have very positive experiences at their medical school. So you will get kind of like a biased take on whatever it is that you're asking. And just because you sense that a group of people or a cohort or a class are close during revisit doesn't mean your cohort, your class, or your experience will be the same. Because again, like your class is going to be made up of completely different people than the people that you're seeing during revisit. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some things that I do think are pretty important to consider, starting with academic support offered at the institution. So when I talk about academic support, I'm actually talking about a couple of different things. And it's not 100% academic support, I'm just bucketing them all together. Starting off with grading scales. So is this school pass-fail? And if it is pass-fail, is it a true pass-fail system, i.e. like it's pass-fail with no internal rankings? Because some schools are really sneaky about that. They'll say that they're pass-fail and their students will tell you they're pass-fail, but actually they have kind of an internal ranking going on that gets released at your dean's letter when you're applying to residency. In that case, I really don't count the school as pass-fail at all, because there's still kind of the threat of grades looming over you. Furthermore, is it pass-fail only during pre-clinicals, or is it also pass-fail during clinicals, which right now is more rare. A lot of schools right now have moved to pass-fail pre-clinicals, but there are only a couple schools that are pass-fail clinicals. And then going on to more of the academic support realm, like what happens when you fail an exam, or if you fail a block? Do you get to retake it? Do you have to repeat the year? Is there extra support available if you're someone who needs that? Does failing an exam or a block go on your transcript? What happens if you fail a rotation? And lastly, how much time do you get to study for step 1 and step 2? Some schools give dedicated time for both, some only step 1 or only step 2. And then other schools make you do things when you're studying for step 1 and step 2. I feel like a lot of the discussion around academics has been around pass-fail versus graded schools. Personally, I go to a pass-fail school. And if you have the option to, I would probably urge you to also pick a pass-fail school, at least pass-fail pre-clinicals, just because that tends to foster a more collaborative environment, because people don't really have the threat of grades weighing over their heads. People don't feel competitive with each other because there's nothing to be competitive about, because everyone's just trying to pass. So if you have the option to go for a true pass-fail school with no internal ranking, I would go for that. Obviously, I listed a lot of other things to consider as well, especially as it relates to what happens if you end up needing more support. I will say yes, most medical students are very high achievers. They don't end up needing that extra support, but I also just think it's really good to think about those things just in case something happens, or just in case you end up needing it. Like for example, let's say you need more time for step 1, or something happened on an exam, you need to retake it. It's better to know that you have the support beforehand rather than freaking out when those kind of situations happen. Another thing that I think is important to consider is a school's match list. I think this is especially important if you're someone interested in a more competitive specialty. I'm thinking derm, ortho, ENT, ophtho, surgical subspecialties in general, things like that. You want to look at how students have done at your school in terms of match results, as well as whether or not there is faculty at the school who's willing to do research with medical students, because that plays a really big factor in whether or not students are able to match into these competitive specialties. I do think the best way to gather this sort of information is to talk to the students and talk about their experience applying to the match, their experience getting research at their school, seeing if they have the right support system to get to where they want to be. I know schools typically do publish their match lists, but things like research opportunities and the support that students feel with regards to the match is not something that is captured on match lists. So I always recommend people to talk to students. There's a really interesting podcast that I came across last year talking about more of this, which I will link down below. And I think it's definitely worth checking out if you're someone considering different medical schools right now. And the last thing that I'm going to mention in terms of things that I think are important is rotation sites and how clinical rotations are done at that medical school. If you go to medical school in the United States, the clinical education that you will get is pretty much standardized across the board. However, there are some things that can make it harder and some things that can make it easier for you. And one of them is established clinical sites at the medical school. Some medical schools are affiliated with hospitals, so it makes it a lot easier. Other medical schools have less of that strong relationship with the hospital, so students have to kind of figure it out a little more by themselves. And this is something I honestly took for granted, I'll be honest, and I didn't even think about this when I was considering schools. And it was only a lot later when I was talking to some of my friends at other medical schools that I realized some of the things that they had to go through to set up their clinical rotations or even go to their clinical rotations. So for example, I have heard of students having almost all of their clinical rotation sites be like a 2-hour drive away. Obviously, that is unideal. And I think some schools make their own students set up their own clinical rotations, which I do think is a little bit more rare, but I did see people kind of talk about that on Reddit. And I think it's important to talk to students about what their experiences during clinical rotations was like. Did they have to travel a long way, potentially across state lines? Did they have to arrange it for themselves? And then are they happy with the arrangements that they got? Apparently in some schools, getting core rotations at specific sites are very, very competitive. At my school is more of a lottery system and everyone kind of takes turns traveling to the farther sites. So it's like more or less fair. Of course, there's always some like unideal parts, but I think in general at my school, students are okay with the way it's set up. And with places that are farther away, the school sometimes provides you with a car, or they come up with some kind of living situation for you so that you don't really have to worry about that while you're on clinical rotations. Rotations are super important when you're a medical student, and so you want to make sure that that is set up for you correctly and that it is as stressless as possible in terms of the logistics, because the rotation itself should be the stressful part. Okay, now let's talk about things I didn't mention. The first one is a small one, and it's going to be NBME versus in-house exams. A lot of students talk about this. For me, it's not a deal breaker, and I don't think it should be a deal breaker for anyone. I think it is more ideal, in my opinion, for a school to have NBME over in-house exams for preclinicals, but that's because my school had in-house exams. I didn't really like them. I didn't think it was helpful in terms of prepping for step 1. But in the end, I still passed step 1. I did fine. Everything's fine. I think it would have made a difference in my well-being when I was studying for step 1. But I think having in-house exams over NBMEs is not a deal breaker. The next thing I did mention is cost versus prestige. The reason I didn't speak about this is because I'm an MD PhD student and my program is funded, so this wasn't a personal consideration of mine, so I don't feel as qualified to talk about it. However, I do see a lot of people making comparisons online and talking about this exact issue of if you were given a school that is top 5 in the nation, for example, versus a school that's completely free, which one should you choose? Or a school that's top 5 versus a state school that's quite a bit cheaper, which one do you choose? And some people would say always go with the cheaper one, it's not worth taking out the loans. But I do want to bring a little bit of nuance into this, and this is kind of informed by my own academic experiences and also what I've seen of the match process happening for students at my school, as well as processes such as OAs and sub-Is and just that sort of stuff in general. It is a little bit unfortunate to say this, but I do think that the prestige of the medical school that you attend can open doors for you. So for example, I saw an Instagram post the other day talking about how Yale Internal Medicine published the way that they matched their students, and they weighed the prestige of the school, of the applicant, super highly. If I can find a link to that article, I will link it down below, but I think that's just one specific example of what I mean when I say the prestige of a school can potentially open doors for you. I bring this up because in the conversation of prestige versus cost, I think prestige is something that may be worth the cost if you are someone hoping to match into a very competitive specialty. So I would just kind of keep that in mind if a competitive specialty is what you want to end up doing, because the name of the school can potentially open doors up for you. And it's not to say that going for the more cost-effective option would close all doors. That is not what I'm saying at all. But some people do find it worth it to go to a higher ranked school. But anyways, if this is you and you're in this boat, I would say talk to the people you trust, talk to your mentors. You're the person who knows your financial situation the best at the end of the day. And again, I just want to stress that getting a medical education in the US, where you go, it's pretty standardized. these are minor differences. And even if you do go for the more cost-effective option rather than prestige and you want to go for a more competitive specialty, you will still be fine. And lastly, one thing I did not mention, this kind of goes along with the vibes thing that I talked about earlier, is a lot of people like to talk about, do the students seem happy, as a potential factor in making a decision on which school. I didn't mention this because I think it's really hard to gauge whether or not the students are happy based on the revisit day. And just because the students that you see on revisit day are happy doesn't mean you will be happy at that school. And again, I just want to stress that the students who volunteer for revisit day, that is a highly biased population. Those are the students who are happy enough with the school that they want to share the joy of the school with the applicants and the admitted students. If they're unhappy, they simply wouldn't volunteer for these things. And clearly they felt strong enough and happy enough about their school that they decided to spend time with the applicants. So I really don't think seeing if the students are happy is a good gauge of the quality of the school. And I certainly don't think it's a good gauge of like whether or not you yourself will be happy at that school. On the other hand, though, if we flip that criteria around and change it to, are the students unhappy? I do think that's informative. The reason being, again, these students are self-selected. So if the happiest students at the school, if you still feel like they're unhappy, something is wrong there. In other words, I really don't care if students are happy because it tells me nothing. But if the students are unhappy, it's a red flag and you probably shouldn't go to that school. So that's going to be all for this video. If you liked it or found it to be helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. If you're a student currently deciding between medical schools, let me know what you're currently considering. And if you're a current medical student, let me know what you thought of and how you picked your medical school and whether or not you disagreed with any of my points. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!